singer Pitbull may consider himself Mr. Worldwide, but really he's just a pretender to the throne. The real Mr. Worldwide is my guest this week, Marc Lorber. Marc's TV career has taken him to all parts of the globe, whether it was proving that everybody loves Raymond in Russia, developing original drama and formats in the Middle East, kickstarting HBO scripted productions in Central and Eastern Europe, or optimizing production techniques in India. Marc and I covered a lot of ground, and we talked about the art of co-production, the skill of adapting formats, and the challenges of working in the international TV market. Enjoy. Hi Marc, welcome to the pod.
Hi Danny, nice to be here. Always good to see you.
Excellent. Yeah, fantastic. I always like to start with a fun question. And my question to you is this. If you could remake any show in any territory outside of the US and UK, which series and which territory would you choose?
Well, I've remade a lot of shows, a lot of languages and territories, shows that I was a part of, shows that I wasn't originally a part of, scripted and non-scripted. It's hard to choose from that bunch because I've had great fun and great success with some of them. But I'm at a nostalgic moment in my life, and I think we need some fun in the world. So if I could ever do it, it would probably be I Love Lucy, and I'd find the next Lucy, or it would be Moonlighting, which I got close to remaking at one point. But that's another story.
You had quite a peripatetic early life. Do you think that helped later on when it came to splitting your working life across different countries and different cultures?
Looking back, perhaps so, moving with my family and having a number of places and times in early life and even in my young adult life and then my own life, you learn to assimilate and make, relationships and friends and be proactive and find the things that you love and get beyond the surface or the tourist value of things and try and dive deep into the culture if you enjoy being there wherever it is. And some were moves that I made the choice, and others were, you might say, either by family or by economics foisted upon me in some ways. And if you throw yourself into it, there's something to be made of it, and there's happiness to be found and joys to be found. And, I think as I look back, I have friends and colleagues around the world, and that's what I feel really great about. From the time that I was 3, 4, 5, people I'm still in touch with who I might not have seen in years, on through, a lot of my travels and the places I've lived and worked. And that's what I take away from it, that we're all still in contact, if even on social media.
And you interned at the David Letterman show.
Yeah.
What attracted you to working in TV, and what lessons in producing did you pick up at Letterman that you've used later on in your career?
I was breaking the chain. I didn't want to be a lawyer or a doctor. That was a great opportunity. My college, my university gave me to be in New York for a semester. They were part of a program, and they could find you an internship or you could go out and make yours. And I was the first kid from Indiana, where David Letterman was from, that they agreed to take. Why exactly? I don't know. There were 1,000 kids a year who wanted to theoretically be an intern, and he just didn't. But I got myself in there and met, and there were 5 interns. 2 of us came of our own design and merit, and the other 2 had industry connections and family quite deep. And it was an interesting experience. I mean, look, you go in with big eyes and big impressions. This was when they were at NBC. They were still, top of their game. And you realize you're going to do a lot of crap work, not always the most exciting. You're at the bottom of the barrel. They had a fairly loose system where a lot of interns became writers or producers. And by the time I had arrived, they didn't want that mix. So they were very clear that, they wouldn't let you often in the writing room or in the production creative room. But I was working, for the producers and for the casting folks who would bring people onto the show. And part of the greatest fun of the job was all these groups or bands or things that thought they wanted to be on Letterman that no one knew about would ultimately fall down to me to either answer the phone back in the day, the fax, the email, no real email, the mail, or they literally would physically come to the building. So there was a great New York kind of underground but not underground band. They Might Be Giants. And these guys would try and come every week and give a sort of mixtape of their music and get on the show. And I was the poor guy who would have to say to them, it ain't likely going to happen. You're not big enough yet, even as an indie band, for them to sample one night. But, great experiences. But if anything, I think you go in expecting and hoping you're going to learn more creative. And if anything, it really taught me that television is a business.
Generally, on these chats, I end up going through people's careers sequentially, and we cover a lot of ground. But there was just so much to cover when I was doing my research that I'm going to move a little bit away from that format. So we're talking about formats, slightly different format this time, and just cover some general points and mix in, I think, a little bit with the career trajectory. I was really interested in was that you've worked across both scripted and the non-scripted sides of the TV business. And so outside of the formats of the shows involved, how do the scripted and non-scripted worlds differ? And what are the similarities in your experience? So whether it's process of culture or deal making, what's the same and what's different about these two worlds that are all part of one business?
Look, we used to be much more segmented and segregated. If you did film, back when I started doing television, and my first job was with Aaron Spelling, and all my film friends said, "Ooh, isn't that like, don't you want to aim higher?" And you did film or television, and then you did television. If you were doing scripted, you were either in drama or telefilms or comedy, but there was less crossover. And certainly then in the unscripted world back then, and as it took on its rise, maybe you were in factual, maybe you were in shiny floor entertainment, maybe you were in location based, and there was less crossover and people wanted to pigeonhole you into things. And the great opportunity that I had in working internationally and working on formats is I thought I could do it all. I thought that, producing is producing is producing. Genre and format may be different, but ultimately, scripted or unscripted, we're trying to tell interesting stories with interesting characters, whether they be real pedestrians or they be actors, whether we script it entirely or we create a situation or a treatment for it, whether there's a competition naturally happening or less naturally happening. So that's been a great joy to me. And now you see the walls have broken down. There are film folks making television folks making film, folks who were in scripted doing unscripted, and people traversing to the other. Tony Wood here in the UK, coming out of The Only Way Is Essex and shows like that, and now quite a successful scripted producer. So who's to say you can't? And I think you can. It's more similar than anything. I think the lesson learned from my producing professor and one of my first mentors, a guy named Mike Hausman, who made a lot of big features. But back at the time, 30 million was a lot of money for a feature. But the difference between a $300,000 feature, a 3 million, and a 30 million, number of elephants on the set. So, I've seen all levels of production in different countries. We have more similarities than we don't. The barriers to entry are much lower. When I started out, people on the set behind a camera were well over 30, had worked on a number of shows, took a certain amount of expertise to operate that camera, to repair that camera. The machinery was expensive. And now, across the world, you can make a 4K show in a closet almost. So I think that's given a lot of people opportunities, incredible similarities. I take what I know from scripted and I apply it to the unscripted shows I'm involved in now, and vice versa, and especially production practices. We get used to having a lot of elephants on the set in scripted, and as economies of scale come to play, we might have to steal some secrets from how we achieve certain unscripted shows, and I find myself doing that. So it just gives me more arrows in my quiver when I go to make things. I think there are less differences than ever. We're trying to bring drama or comedy into unscripted, and we're trying to bring a certain freshness and innovation into scripted that, we get great ideas out of unscripted. Whether it's Squid Games begetting Squid Games or Traitors begetting a scripted series about treachery or vice versa, are they that different? No.
What do you look for in a scripted creative pitch when producers come to you? Which elements are important to you when you're pitching a series to buyers?
I mean, look, I'm looking for something that's slightly left or right of center that I feel in some ways is familiar but is unique. And because I'm working on co-production and international, I always want to believe, can it work locally or regionally, but does it have the elements that will travel? Is it a unique enough take on a cop show? Or is it's a great cop show for here, but they're doing things like that in 4 other countries and it may not travel extensively. I'm looking for that. I'm looking for who's behind the project, the creative team, from producers and production company to writer or writers or creators or lead director or cast, or even other talents behind the camera who are involved or co-producers. That interests me. And then I think in terms of taking it to commissioners, I'm quite cognizant that a lot of people want to jump ahead and want to tell you why it's going to work for the audience. But initially, we're pitching B2B, business to business. Our business to a commissioner who, yes, wants to think about the audience, but we have to make the case of why it works for their business, their demographics, their setup or silo or system or player or streamer or linear or fast, and all the things that they might want or take. That's initially what's going to work, and they're going to pitch it internally. Very few times these days where even the guy or gal in the room who could make the decision is going to make the decision in the room solely without discussing it with their team and maybe discussing it with other teams, whether it be marketing or finance or programming or whomever. So I'm quite cognizant we're pitching to a business and we've got to put it in those terms and then help them understand why the audience should take to it. But initially it's to the business. So some of the elements that I'm brought, I carve or push away because I don't think they're as germane to the first conversation or subsequent conversations, which include budget, which include marketing, which include legal parameters and rights that are important to those businesses we're pitching to.
And when a script has made that transition to production and on-air success in one market, what are the key elements that make a successful scripted format adaptation for other territories?
Freedom. Too often, the original creators or producers or team want to be intimately involved or want to have a greater degree of control or approval. I often say, look, if you're looking, find a great production company that has a like mind in another country where you think you want to get it off. And if they have approached you, do your due diligence. What have they made? What have they adapted? Who are they selling to? Are we seemingly on the same page? Are we of like mind? But you need to give them the freedom to adapt that format. It doesn't mean we take Italian food and we turn it into Chinese food. We're speaking two completely different flavors here. But and that's where we know we're not on the same page. But you want to give them the freedom to adapt, to make it work locally, if that's changing storylines or character descriptions or character lines or even the title or any of that. And when we hold too close to the original, that's where, I think we lose some of the possibilities and where they become less successful. I don't want to beat up on shows, but, there have been shows that really didn't adapt much and you can spot them right off and they don't succeed. The ones that do have that freedom, I'm reminded there is a documentary, I don't love it, Exporting Raymond. And it was the end of my time. I know you're going to come to it with Sony in Russia. And Phil Rosenthal kind of came in with a rather, I won't call it even an American attitude, but an attitude of, I've made a lot of comedy. I know what I'm doing. I made it successful in my native country. So naturally, I know how to tell you to do it in another country. And he came to realize in the documentary and thereafter, no, they know what they're doing in their own country. And they ultimately made far more episodes, original episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond than were ever made in the United States, made everybody a lot of money. So back to William Goldman, nobody knows nothing in a way. And so you have to take a certain approach of, I can tell you what I know, I can bring best practices, I can bring ideas and solutions, but I need to understand the local culture and language to make it really feel organic. What I often say to people is, what I will give you, it's not that I'm smarter than you, and probably I'm not. It's that I may have seen 10 ways to get somebody out the door funny, and you've seen 3. So I can give you the other 7, and those may be good solutions and options. But you've got to find the right one that works for your culture, your demographic, your channel. And ideally, we've given you the freedom to do that. Or we've got Grace Point, the Broadchurch remake in the US. Not to beat up on it, but having seen both, it wasn't an organic remake to me. That's not to knock the creatives involved. Everybody, I'm positive, went out with their best efforts, but it didn't work for various reasons. And I've seen that as well. There's an infamous story of Dick Wolf in Law and Order in France. And he came and he wanted to be involved, and he saw how they worked, and they work in a different fashion on the set every day, and just realized, hey, this is not my way, and this is too frustrating. So I'm just going to leave and let them do it how they want to do it in a way, and ideally they make it a success for themselves.
Well, you mentioned Russia,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that we have in common because we were both very active in Russia in the mid 2000s. You
Yeah.
were more active, I think, by actually being based there. What does the creative process look like in a market like Russia? Is it unique to that time and place, or were you able to draw on storytelling and production techniques from other markets?
It was, having worked in the UK or Australia or Canada and a little bit, in Spanish in Latin America, that was a very deep end of the water experience. A culture, a language, an alphabet that was very foreign to me and other Americans. And it was at a time where not everything had started to turn, although the government was starting to acquire media assets, shall we say. But it was really the birth of modern Russian television. I was there. You would maybe say 2003, it began with Sony. I was there in 2005, 2006, when we had some huge successes that haven't been repeated there and probably are hard to repeat elsewhere. To have a show go out #1 and finish with a 48% share overall, probably hard to match. That was that version of Ugly Betty, Betty LaFea, which we made 60 more episodes than the original. So I did 200 episodes of that and other shows. It was quite a different and unusual experience in culture. So it really made me look at how I operated and the experience and the education I had and say, right, that's all great. And I had great mentors, great television education, great experience to that point. That's not going to be what is necessary here to work with these people. There's more of them than there are of me, and I've got to assimilate and find the core commonalities and take a different approach because they already have a chip on their shoulder about your American way or your colonialist way or whatever. But we did have certain knowledge, and that birth of sort of different and modern Russian television, not so much state-made, certainly began with a lot of formats, things that were more creative and expressive than they had been able to make. And then you're meeting a lot of young people who are getting that and now coming up with their own ideas or seeing a way to direct different than the past and running with it. And so, I still have some friends and colleagues there that I'm in touch with. Obviously, it's a disappointing and sad situation. I had left. I haven't really been back there since 2009 for Disney in terms of working there. And as many people know, my heart is strongly with Ukraine, both creatively and physically. I've had a Ukrainian refugee staying with me in London until she was able to step out on her own, thankfully, successfully. So, I'm torn in many ways, and I wish I could be in contact with people and doing things there. It was just an unusual experience. It was kind of a Wild West in that nobody knew exactly what would work, and people were looking for new ideas. And there was an opportunity for Disney and Warner Brothers and Sony to bring great, successful shows And you found that the ones that were too far left or right didn't really work. The things that were great for family viewing, for mass audience viewing, that translated, like The Nanny, or like Married with Children, or Everybody Loves Raymond, or a moth to butterfly story like Ugly Betty that has worked in a number of countries, but worked hugely there. Those were the things that people took to. And if you could just make them in a slightly better way, shoot them in a slightly better way, people would respond. Our production values were far better than most of the things that were being done. So, but it was a mix of experiences, very Dickensian, the best of times and in some ways the worst of times. But it was a building experience for me. And I think it's led how I approached working in other cultures and languages that were far different than you would say the Western languages and cultures, whether it be French, German, Spanish speaking, Italian speaking, English speaking, and what we naturally went on. We watched a ton of television growing up. There was and videotapes and movies. There was a limit to what they saw and their frame of reference. So other places where you want to say, remember that scene in Casablanca, or remember Dick Van Dyke when he goes? No, because they had never seen it. Remember The Avengers or The Prisoner or no, they hadn't seen it. So you have to find a way to frame it in a different fashion.
I feel sorry in some ways for the people who missed out on that, but in some ways they were blessed by not having to listen to Dick Van Dyke's so-called English accent in
Yes.
Mary Poppins. So
yes,
wasn't all bad.
Wasn't all bad. Supercalifragilistic.
Another Eastern European gig was HBO
Yeah.
Central and Eastern Europe. Obviously, the HBO brand is iconic and has tremendous value, particularly with upscale audiences. So when it came to developing material under the HBO brand in CE, what was the brief and how did that dovetail with the US service and the US brand, if at all?
It didn't. I got a call from some friends who said, would you speak to this headhunter about this role? And it was quite interesting. And I thought, what a great opportunity, what a great challenge. And the challenge was that they had been trying to kickstart original series production across the region. And they had found it hard to that point to do it. There were a lot of fiefdoms, there were a lot of individual countries who wanted to do their own things. And to find somebody within that system who could head programming and production, who didn't have, a horse in the race already. Would the Poles listen to the Hungarians? Would the Hungarians listen to a Romanian leading them, and everybody wanted to do their own thing? So they arrived at, hey, let's hire this American guy who's worked overseas and in some different cultures and, a tougher environment like Russia and other places. So the mandate when I came in, they had been doing some documentaries, was ramp up the documentaries. And we want HBO-style documentaries. And looking back, perhaps I went a little too far in greenlighting some documentaries that were HBO fascinating, but politically difficult in some of those countries, Hungary especially. They were doing some comedy, but stand-up comedy, but it was relatively rough and nascent, so reforming that. But the big mission was, we want you to do an original series in each of the 4 key countries in the first year. Okay, well, that means damn the torpedoes. We're going to have to move fast, quick, and hard and figure this out. And it's not going to be necessarily, as I came to find, throughout my career, with the companies that had already existed and were successful in the current system. To try and make an HBO show or a premium show at the time was a different approach, a different attention to detail. And we did that. 3 versions of In Treatment, not the American show, even though that was an HBO show, the original Israeli show. And another Israeli show that became the first Hungarian show called When Shall We Kiss? We're the first, and it was, look, find creatives there who can adapt this. And not just the folks who had been working in the state system or the system. Not that, and we did use some, but, finding people who could think beyond and think of something special. And hiring production companies. I remember I got a lot of grief hiring a company in Romania that I'm still quite close to, have worked with over the years. The guy who runs it is a quite good personal friend now. He's in the most famous rock band for the last 30 years in Romania. But he and his company, he started a post company and a production company that only really done corporate and commercials. But he had worked with a lot of Western entities in commercials and corporate and got that they had certain ways of working as an HBO would want to, or a Netflix, certain rules and procedures, but also a way to operate. And a lot of other production companies said, well, why didn't we've made series here, we've made films. I just liked his approach. And he made a great show and delivered everything that we needed. And so that was the mission. And we got there, not without struggle and pulling the mule cart behind us. And not everybody loved the approach. And there were people who got hired or used and others who didn't. And it is what it is, but we came in hard and fast. We were putting up significant budgets and going after some of the greatest talent behind the camera and in front of the camera in those countries, and adapting them to how you make a HBO TV show was different. Saying to Oscar-nominated directors in Czech or in other countries, you don't get final cut. That's, and you don't have complete creative autonomy, let's say. That's something different, and merging those two needs. I'd like to say I and my team did it successfully at times, and other times, we made mistakes and we learned. Sadly, HBO is not, in that division that I helped to give birth to, and others came in and built up even more, and they made some great shows, is no longer up and running. That's a bit sad.
And then Middle East is another region that you've been very,
near and
very,
dear to my heart.
yeah, very active in. So again, compare and contrast how you would work or have been working in the Middle East with, say, a Central and Eastern Europe, because obviously it's going to be very different from Western Europe or the US, but is there more crossover in terms of the way things work?
As well as Africa in a way. I mean, I think some people want to paint certain regions with one paintbrush, and you come to realize it's countries that have different dialects and languages, even if they speak one common underlying language, differences in religion, differences in politics, difference in wealth inequality, or even the impression of wealth. And that, until not so many years ago, certainly in the last decade, they had and have a state television system, but they didn't really have, like Eastern Europe and other places and Africa, they didn't really have an expansive group of linear channels or fast channels or streamers. They had cable. Now in some places, they have exposure to a number of streamers. The state channels have changed or not. The linear channels are having the same adjustments that everyone is, but that it was a relatively nascent system, and that, except in certain countries, the UK, the US, others, going into television or film wasn't a career path. And there weren't film schools, and there weren't apprentice programs, and there weren't opportunities, and it was a rather strange thing to do. But now there are schools and programs and apprenticeships there. And also a certain generation has gone to school, whether it be in Canada or America, the US or Germany or Prague, and brought those skills back. Did they have the ability to tell certain stories? Not entirely, politically or religiously or financially, but there's greater opportunity. So in all of these places, people say to me, where's their Breaking Bad? And I say, it's coming. And people ask me, have you met talented people? I said, oh, yes, I've met their Scorseses and Spielbergs, and they're talented young men and women. I may not have met 100 of them, but I've met more than 2. And some are doing quite well. And I've seen the evolution of their careers, and they begat others behind them. So it is coming and it is growing, and we'll see more intriguing shows from there. But it's still not easy, and it's still relatively nascent to a degree in terms of production capabilities across the region. But I find it challenging. I enjoy the challenge of using more of my senses and having to figure it out, and not being able to rest on what few laurels I have. And taking experienced people and pushing them forward, and taking less experienced people in places and saying, right, how do we make this interesting? And I've had some great moments making some of the first shows of their kind in the Middle East, because people gave me some trust and autonomy. and that's built up. And I enjoy working across all of those countries. And in fact, in a lot of times, it's the most international of crews I've ever had. And it means trying to stitch together a lot of different cultures and personalities. And when you do it well, it's great fun. It's a family, it's a village, and it's a joy.
There is a practical component to being an international TV executive, and you're talking about these different places and different regions that you've worked in, living in multiple countries, constantly traveling. How do you make it work from a personal perspective?
Uh, Not easily. Look, even when I was living in LA, I made my first ever telefilm that I was able to be a producer on in LA. And I didn't make another one there for 20 years. Production was always, at least for the things that I was doing, somewhere else. So you're away from family and friends. And, I've seen the birth of texting and email and Skype and Zoom, and it's been a great savior in terms of staying in WhatsApp and staying in touch with your family and friends and vice versa, and then being aware of what you're doing. That's hard. You have to have a supportive family. I'm blessed to have a wife who's got her own career, not in the business. Certainly doesn't sit home waiting for me to come home. And so she's supportive in that way and has traveled to visit me in a lot of places. I think my parents came to love her when we were still dating, because she came all the way to Nigeria and not just to Lagos, to other places on her own to visit me. And they said, there's a tough woman and somebody who's willing to support you. When I was living there for some months working, that's what you need. And friends who are supportive, who, when you come back to town, they throw you right back into the middle of the social system and circle and embrace you and want to know about your experiences and want to come visit or travel or, get beyond the tourist experience. So, okay, I'm going to Rome or I'm going to Abu Dhabi, and, what should I do that is out of the norm? Where can you recommend me? And they've had some great experiences through mine.
We talked about format
Yeah,
remakes and how that translates across different territories. But another big trend right now, clearly in TV, is co-production,
yeah.
particularly of scripted TV series across multiple broadcasters. What do you think makes a successful scripted co-pro? And can a great project work without a great process in place to deliver a successful partnership?
The answer to your second question, no, not at all. That's where it gets messy, not just creatively, but financially, legally, technically, and marketing wise. The art, it is the name of my company, the art of co-production. The art of co-production, or the skill is to find people who you think are skilled, see if they're on relatively the same page, see if you can put them onto a table together and keep that table level and keep it level constantly. And of course, it begins with the creative and the production, but you cannot ignore or excuse the legal, technical, financial, and marketing processes and people that surround every production and every co-production. And it can be as difficult aligning those processes as it can the creative and the production. So some people go, well, they want to do this project with us creatively. Great. That's the hard part is over. No, it's part of a long process. And it doesn't always make sense. And there are two things. There are the creative co-productions, and you want to feel that there is a project that is organic, that there are elements that will add from either a co-producing producer, co-producing country, and or co-producing co-commissioner that makes sense, let alone to have potentially an equity entity who wants to be involved. And of course, distributors who feel that if they're advancing money during the course of production, as opposed to on delivery and afterwards, they're putting their monies at risk, just like the shows they might make themselves. And so they want a meaningful seat at the table. In fact, everybody I work with, even if there's a lead producer, a lead commissioner, wants a meaningful seat at the table. Doesn't mean they're going to have the final approval. Doesn't mean that everything they say has to be taken as a given, but to have a stake in the process. Then you have more of an organic situation. But it's in a way show running, because I feel like in a writer's room, you want to encourage debate and discussion, figure out the different practices and experiences that people are bringing. But at some point, the debate has to be cut off, and someone or somebody has to make a decision of which direction we're going to go. And yet make everyone feel that they had that seat at the table and they had an opportunity to give their say. And then the second part is an economic co-production, which may be completely unrelated. Look, we're going to shoot here because there's a tax shelter or a better tax credit or a lower cost of production. It's not so much involving the creative process as it is the cost of, we can get more days there, but we got to do the post over here. We want to qualify it as an EU production, so that's why we're going to split these two elements. What changes or compromises might we need to make behind the camera or in front of the camera to qualify? Certainly as more countries have levies and quotas, qualifying productions today and for future sales creates a value. That's the trick of it, is trying to figure out, even if somebody says, I love that project, let's do it together. Are we on the same page? And if we're not, it isn't going to go smoothly. So we need to lay out all of the key issues as early as we can.
So looking back at your career, if there is one show you would like to be remembered for or associated with out of the many that you have been associated with, which one would you pick?
So, that question is like asking you which of your children you love more. The easiest way, and it's people ask me, what's your favorite city that you lived in? And I say, the last one I'm living in, or the last one I spent time in, the last project I did, because they're all children. I had a part in birthing them, raising them, educating them, perhaps, but it takes, a village. Even the ones that were not successful, I have fond memories of the process or the people. And some of the ones that were successful, no one knows the stories behind the scenes. It might have been a difficult production, but what people saw was in front of camera. I think some of the ones I want to be remembered for are the ones where we had a great crew and cast experience, and we enjoyed the process, and we looked around and were thankful for the opportunity. It is those productions, or I'm standing in a river in a valley 4.5 hours from Marrakesh and Casablanca. Turns out that valley, and I didn't know it until I was leaving, one side of the valley was Muslim, one side was Jewish. And they coexisted and got along. They didn't make a situation out of it. And I walked from the set back to this. There were only 2 guest houses. One was built for us in this valley along the stunningly beautiful river with a mountain called Lake Cathedral. It looks like the Prudential Rock. Stunning, all by myself. And I thought, wow. And my feet are in the river, and I'm looking around, and there's a donkey walking by, and tremendous nature. And it doesn't get too much better than this. And that was a reversioning of a BBC format called No Kitchen Required that we took. I think it was the first time it had been made anywhere outside of the UK as a format, and we amped it up. And it was just a tremendous opportunity to be somewhere and take something, and the people I was working with and what we were doing. That's one, but also, this time of the season, I made a great Christmas movie for Mar Vista, for, Lifetime or Hallmark, called Will You Marry Me, that had Wendy Malick and a ton of great talents and young talents. And it was just so much fun. But there's also a story in there, making a Christmas movie in July, and the reindeer that escaped, and we made the primetime news in Toronto, and me and my crew chasing this reindeer in rut. And my boss is calling me from LA to say, what happened today? I said, well, half the day was lost because we were chasing this reindeer in Oakville. What can I tell you? Craziness. Finally got it treed or shooed in a backyard, and it had so run out of energy that we were finally able to lead it and the handlers back into a truck. But who knew that reindeer can jump from standing 8 feet in the air? So every time we got it near a fence, boop, and there were police and there were news reporters because, hey, a Christmas movie in July has lost its reindeer. So those are the fond memories, and the ones that I am And that also was Nisha Ganatra's first telefilm. And she's gone on to have a fantastic career. And so I'm proud to have worked with her and given her that opportunity at the time. And yeah, a lot of fun.
Well, finally, I always like
Yeah.
to finish with a fun question about media. So, if
Okay.
you found yourself, let's say, on location, let's say somewhere in the middle of Morocco, between Casablanca and Marrakesh, and you could have one film, one book, one TV box set, and an
Okay.
album, which ones would you choose to keep you company?
The film that made me stand up and go, wow, it's not what I thought film was, and I want to do this and be a part of it. Blue Velvet. And then not 3 years later, I was working with David Lynch in New York in film school, and not 2 years later, I had another chance to interact with him working with on Wild at Heart for Sam Goldwyn, which is behind me. Book. It's either an American series set in Utah, period, that fascinated me as a kid and still fascinates me, called the Great Brain series. It's about a kid. It's written. It's fiction, but nonfiction. His brother wrote about his older brother, who was the middle brother, who just got. He was like the ransom of Red Chief in a way, but he got into and out of situations and figured them out with his great brain. And it was a great series of books that I still have on a shelf as a kid. Or you might say it's The Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. Um, Box set. Well, it would be Better Call Saul, and then it would mean that somehow I'd have to have space for Breaking Bad somewhere in there. Album for pure joy. I'm sorry, I can't give you one. I'm going to give you four. It's Madness because I'm working with them, the band. It's the Talking Heads 1977 for pure joy. And then that just brings me back to my youth. It's Tom Petty, Wildflowers, and it's John Mellencamp's Pink Houses.
An eclectic mix.
There you go.
Very rare that Madness and John Mellencamp would be on the same list, but I think that speaks to
All
an eclectic.
boys, yeah, all boys from certain backgrounds and small towns in a way, or small councils, making their way and wanting to play music and then writing about it. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, Mark, thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun to chat.
Me
I'll
too.
be, I'll be looking out for the next Marc Lorber produced project, whether it's from England, from the homeland, or indeed the motherland.
They're all coming. Thanks, Danny.